A slight change of scene now. A quick trip to the capital, to London's South Bank, where there stands rather incongruously a replica of an old Elizabethan theatre, the Globe Theatre. The original Globe burnt down almost 400 years ago, when a cannon on stage set fire to the thatched roof. The play being performed at the time was a history play, the story of Henry VIII, and it was written by the greatest genius I think this country has ever known. His name was William Shakespeare. I love this place. It's been so lovingly crafted, using all the original techniques the Elizabethans would have used. The roofs of Norfolk thatch, oak timbers, plaster of lime and sand and goat's hair. And you can just imagine what a place like this would have been like in Shakespeare's day. The whole melting pot of Elizabethan London, rich and poor, all gathered together. Up in the galleries, the gentry and city merchants and lawyers, and down in the pit, for 1 penny, standing room only, rain or shine, the groundlings, as they were called, the meaner sort, apprentices and journeymen and tradesmen and women. And what they'd all gathered here to see were the plays of Shakespeare. Comedies that still make us laugh, love stories that still stir the passions, tragedies that still have the power to shock and amaze. Forget the old-fashioned language. These plays still speak to us. There's nothing narrow or medieval about them. You get the sense that Shakespeare had this incredibly modern mind. And that's important, because it suggests that by the 16th century, people had changed. Maybe not in the way they lived their lives, but in the way they thought about life, about the world. And it's that internal transformation summed up in the genius of Shakespeare that I want now to try to explain. This journey into the mind of Shakespeare begins in Stratford-on-Avon, his birthplace, and home now to the Royal Shakespeare Company. This was where Shakespeare spent his formative years, and it's pretty typical of a late medieval market town, growing in size in the 16th century, growing in prosperity under the influence of the merchant class, the guilds. Shakespeare's father was a guildsman. He was a glove maker. This was the house where he worked, and Shakespeare was born in one of those upper rooms. Now, we don't know much about his early life, but there's this great scene in one of his plays where he talks about the ages of man. First, the infant mewling and puking in his nurse's arms, and then the schoolboy, with his satchel and his shining morning face, creeping like snail unwillingly to school. And that image captures a profound transformation shaking up 16th century society, the way that education, learning, was moving out of the hands of the privileged few into the hands now of the humble son of a Stratford glove maker. Once, schooling in this country was controlled by the church. But all that changed with the Reformation. Shakespeare's school in Stratford, the Edward VI Grammar School, was founded by the town's guildsmen. It offered scholarships for the town's deserving poor and charged fees for those better off. Boys only, 40 boys in all. And this was where the sons of Stratford's merchant class came to learn the skills necessary to inherit the family business. Later in his career, one of Shakespeare's contemporaries, Ben Jonson, sneered that Shakespeare knew small Latin and less Greek, which is pretty ironic considering how rigorous the education here would have been. By the time he left school at the age of 16, Shakespeare would have known more Latin than any classics graduate at university today. He'd have been saturated in the ancient world. He'd have read Pliny and Aristotle and Socrates and Plato, all the great classical philosophers and historians and natural scientists. The century before his birth had seen a rediscovery in classical knowledge, a rebirth, as it was called, a renaissance of knowledge, fueled by the printing press. But what excites me even more about the 16th century, more than the Renaissance of the 15th century, is that by now we were daring to question this ancient knowledge. We were daring to look for ourselves, making up our own minds as to how the world really works. Rather than just blindly trusting medieval doctors, for instance, with their frankly ignorant ideas as to how the human body works, by now we were performing anatomies, stripping away the flesh, confronting the reality of the human condition. And in a strange kind of way, this is exactly what Shakespeare was doing in his plays. He was showing us as we really are, as multi-layered human beings with all of our subtleties and our contradictions. And it was this growing sense of self-awareness, self-knowledge in the 16th century that drags us out of the medieval into the modern.
Shakespeare came to London as a travelling player in the year 1588. What he encountered here in London was a world of horizons pushed back. Elizabethan London spilled beyond the boundaries of the old medieval walled city. Houses fronted the river now down to Westminster, and on the south bank in Southwark, beyond the control of the old city guilds, there stood brothels and theatres and taverns, the earthy exuberance of a rich and varied life.
If I had to sum up in one word what was new about Shakespeare's London, I'd say it was cosmopolitan. The word quite literally means moving beyond national boundaries, and London did that too. The Thames was full of shipping. City merchants were trading with Europe. They were backing ventures as far afield as Russia, the Americas, India. Just upriver from here, there's a replica of the Golden Hind, the ship in which Sir Francis Drake sailed round the world. We'd never been more connected. But I'm not talking about cosmopolitan just in the sense of geography. I'm talking about a state of mind. People who are cosmopolitan, they're subtle, they're sophisticated, they're witty, they're urban. They've got minds open to every experience, the high life, the low life, and that's what Shakespeare had. And he took all of this rich experience and he served it up at the Globe, what he called his wooden O. And his audience, who got his wavelength, they lapped it up. And in this flowering of ideas and intellect, we moved as a nation from the old to the new.